Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink, sharing a couple of cards using the Simon Says Stamp March 2020 card kit. Absolutely loved this long, narrow stamp in the Stronger Together stamp set. So I pulled that out and I have my MISTI stamp platform here, and then some Ranger like distress watercolor paper with the smooth side facing up. And I lined up the stamp, and you can see how long this is. You could stamp this on like a large card if you wanted. And I lined up the stamp, and I'm inking it up with VersaFine Clair Morning Mist ink. So just a nice gray ink. And then after stamping it, I was like, I can't just do one card, I gotta do more. So I lined up another piece of Ranger watercolor paper, this time moving it over, because I thought I would do one card in like portrait mode and one card in landscape mode, because, you know, mix it up just a little bit. So same thing, inked it up with that Morning Mist ink, stamped it. And then to color, I'm using the watercolor pencils that came in the kit. I haven't used watercolor pencils in years and years. I honestly cannot remember the last time I used watercolor pencils. So that's also why I chose specifically this stamp image, because I was like, leaves are pretty simple. Not a whole lot of work to do, and, you know, get me back into using color pencils again. So I started with one of the green pencils and just very lightly scribbled it on. And then I'm just using a water brush to, you know, move the color around. I gotta say, this little set of watercolor pencils I was quite pleased with. A big reason why I stopped using them years ago was I had a lot of difficulty, like, really getting the color moving. I didn't like, you know, if it left lines, that sort of a thing. But I honestly think too, it was just my impatience and user error more than anything. Because I remember struggling a lot with watercolor when I first started and trying, you know, all the different mediums, and watercolor pencils I always found the most difficult, I guess, at the time, but they're fun. So I did very simple, you know, coloring directly on the images with the green first, pulled it out with the water brush. And then I was just using the water brush with like a yellow pencil and just applying it to a little like makeshift palette, just plastic packaging. And I did the same with a blue pencil as well. And then just picked up the color from the packaging with the water brush and applied it that way. So that way I can kind of work while everything is still wet. Otherwise, you just let each layer dry and then you could just scribble with the watercolor pencil and pull it out. That's kind of, I guess, the beauty of it, is you can kind of do whatever works for you. So I did the same thing in the end with the green. I also just pulled sort of the color from the pencil onto the packaging and then used that to kind of paint lightly along the stems of this image just to give it a little bit more color. And then at the very end, I just went over the leaves with just the clean water brush, nothing on it, just to kind of blend all those colors together a little bit more and smooth it out a bit more, mostly just because I could. So after I did that, let everything dry completely once it was done, which didn't take very long because they're small images, not a whole lot of water added, that sort of thing. Let everything dry, and then I ended up deciding to die cut these slightly smaller. I wanted to use the pattern papers that came in the kit, and I wanted them to obviously show up. So I die cut them, the pattern papers, with the largest of Simon's basic rectangles wafer dies. And then I chose another of the rectangles to die cut these pieces that I had watercolored, so they'll be slightly smaller. And then I also die cut some of Simon's SLATE gray cardstock with the bold hello wafer die that comes in the kit. So I die cut, of course, multiple layers, and I'm stacking them together with Simon's craft tacky glue so that each one is 3 layers deep. Just again, it gives it that dimension. I pretty much can almost not have just a die cut word 1 layer. It needs something, unless it's like glitter cardstock, but even then I usually stack cardstock under it. I can't not do it. So after I stacked my sentiments, I also wanted to stamp sentiments from the Stronger Together set. So I kind of figured out where I was going to put everything. And then once I was happy with the placement of the little stamp sentiment, again, have everything in my MISTI, lined it all up. And I'm going to stamp the sentiment with that same Morning Mist ink. So stamp this on the first card front, and then I'm going to quickly clean off the stamp and then reposition it for the second card front. So just a bit of fiddling since I did both of these slightly different. But again, it's pretty simple. Usually more often than not though when I'm doing more than one card, like everything's in the same spot, so it just goes a little faster. But with one like this, it's just a matter of like moving things around. So I'm going to do the same thing with the insides of the cards. I'm going to line up that large long stamp again with my card base on the inside of my MISTI here, and then I'm going to stamp that like stem and leaf image. This time just using Simon's Mint ink. Really hard to see kind of on camera, but just a nice pale green, you know, ties it all together. So I did that with the first card base, stamping it kind of along the bottom, how the like landscape version is going to go. And then for the portrait version, I moved the stamp over, so I'm stamping more towards like the spine of the card. And just same thing. Quickly wiped off the stamp so I'm not getting ink smears all over the white cardstock, and then I'll ink that up with Simon's Mint ink, stamp that on the inside. And then once the branches or stems are basically stamped, I'm going to grab another sentiment from the Stronger Together set. And then that I'm going to line up and I'm going to stamp that as well with that same Morning Mist VersaFine Clair ink. So again, fiddling around with the card bases, figuring out where the sentiment's going to go, while also fitting everything in. I'm basically kind of like lining everything up backwards because I use my MISTI like in this direction, whereas I think it's meant for the lid to be on the right hand side. I see that in other people's videos when they use it that way, and to me that's completely backwards. I can't do it the way. I like to open my MISTI like a book, you know, so it just is just odd to me to use it the other way. I literally would have to stop and really think about it. So just random. Anyway, stamped the sentiment on the inside of the one card, cleaned it off, lined it up with the second card base, stamped it again with that Morning Mist ink. And then while, of course, I have my MISTI out, I also pulled out 2 of Simon's Slate gray envelopes because they matched with the cardstock I used for the die cut sentiment. So I thought, while I've got everything out, I'll stamp my envelopes. I like to either just use coordinating envelopes, you know, similar colors, or if I'm going to stamp them, I have to do it when I do the cards because I am not going to go back and stamp, you know, envelopes way after the fact. So lined up the envelopes and just stamped that stem and leaf image again using that same Morning Mist ink. So the one envelope, of course, I stamped it like kind of along the bottom of the envelope, and then the other envelope, I'm going to stamp it along the left-hand side. Again, just little subtle things to kind of tie each card together with their envelope with the inside of each card. So then I can set all that aside and now start assembling my cards. So I'm going to adhere those die cut sentiments with the craft tacky glue and just adhere them to each of these backgrounds. And then once those sentiments are adhered into place, I'm going to back each of these with Simon's Big Momma foam tape, which Big Momma just refers to the size of the foam tape roll. It's massive. But the foam tape itself isn't. It's thin and I like it. This is like one of my favorite like ways to add dimension. So I backed each of those with that foam tape, and then I'm going to adhere the pattern paper to my card bases. And since I'd used the largest of the basic rectangles wafer dies on the pattern paper, it will completely cover the front of both of these A2 size cards. So I adhered the pattern paper first, just using craft tacky glue, so that way I have, you know, that couple of seconds of wiggle room to make sure things are lined up. And then once those are adhered, I can peel off the backing from both of the card fronts and then just adhere them to each of the cards. So peel off the backing and adhere the one, and I was making sure that I was matching up the proper orientation with the inside of the card, because I have done that many times and have to, like, you know, peel everything apart and redo it and all that kind of stuff because, you know, the inside of the card was the wrong one and the sentiments are upside down or whatever. So I got everything adhered. You could leave it at this, but I had to add something. Didn't really want to add sparkle. These are more kind of masculine, could be masculine cards. Really, with me, I will do either or, it doesn't matter. But I wanted to add just a little bit of something. So I pulled out these Studio Claudia. These are the Seafoam Pearls, and they just went so well with the colors. You know, they're not sparkly, they're not too blingy, but they add that just that little extra something. So I kind of sprinkled those along each of these like stems and leaves, and then I'm just going to adhere them into place with that craft tacky glue, just picking them up with the Studio Claudia embellishment wand. I've said this in a lot in recent videos. I've been using this for a couple months now, however long it's been available when I bought it, and absolutely love it. It is just awesome. So anyway, adhered all these little pearls into place with just those dabs of glue, and then that's going to finish off these cards. So as always, I will have links below the video to my blog post. I will have a supply list with links to all the supplies used. I'll also have a link to the unboxing video for this card kit if you missed that. It'll all be linked below and linked in the upper corner, all over the place. So you can check that out if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, for thumbs upping, commenting, all of it. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye!